Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has recently enacted a controversial law that significantly expands the scope of military conscription, now mandating that men up to 60 years old are eligible for military service. This drastic measure reflects the escalating severity of Ukraine's personnel crisis on the front line, a situation so dire that the government is even contemplating extending the draft age to retirement age. The decision to call up older individuals underscores the immense strain on Ukraine's fighting force, necessitating increasingly unconventional methods to bolster its rank. Many of these newly conscripted individuals, some as old as 60, are reportedly undergoing abbreviated training programs, with reports suggesting as little as 12 weeks of instructions before being deployed to active combat zone, particularly in critical areas like Pokrovsk in the Donbas region. This move follows the United States' rejection of Zelensky's earlier proposal to lower the draft age to 16, a decision that forced Ukraine to turn to its older population as a last resort. The conscription of older citizens has sent shockwave through the international community, drawing strong condemnation from Russia, which has framed the policy as a desperate and inhumane measure. In stark contrast to Ukraine's expensive conscription efforts, Russia has thus far avoided a general mobilization, instead relying on a system of lucrative bonus and incentive to encourage voluntary enlistment in its military. The new conscription law signed by President Zelensky marked a significant escalation in Ukraine's efforts to address its acute manpower shortage. By raising the maximum age for military service to 60, the Ukrainian government is signaling the depths of its struggle to maintain sufficient troop levels on the front lines. This decision is not merely an adjustment of regulations, it is a profound indicator of the existential threat Ukraine faces and the extreme measure it is willing to undertake to defend its territory. The rationale behind such a broad conscription policy stems from the relentless attrition on the battlefield, where prolonged and intense fighting has led to significant casualties and a depletion of younger, more readily available recruits. The extension of the draft age to include men up to 60 years old is an acknowledgement that the traditional pools of military-age personnel are no longer sufficient to meet the demands of a protracted, large-scale conflict. The contemplation of even further expanding the draft to retirement age highlights the government's desperate search for any available human resource to sustain its defense. This legislative act also carries significant social implications, as it places an unprecedented burden on a demographic that traditionally would be considered beyond active combat roles, forcing older individuals to potentially abandon their civilian lives and enter a high-stake military environment. The reality of these expanded conscription efforts is particularly stark for the individual affected. Reports indicate that many of the newly drafted men, including those in their late 50s and early 60s, are being rushed through significantly abbreviated training cycles, a 12-week training period for individuals who may have little to no prior military experience and who are also contending with the physical challenges associated with age, raise serious concerns about their preparedness for modern warfare. Such accelerated training might cover basic combat skills, weapon handling, and tactical awareness, but it is unlikely to fully equip individuals for the complexity and immense psychological pressure of frontline combat. The deployment of these older, less experienced recruits to intensely contested areas like Pokrovsk in the Donbas region further underscores the dire circumstance. Pokrovsk, situated in an area of ongoing heavy fighting, represents a critical sector where Ukrainian forces are engaged in brutal trench warfare and intense artillery duels. Placing less prepared older troops in such high-stakes environment inherently increase their vulnerability and potentially impact overall unit effectiveness, even as it addresses immediate personnel gaps. This strategy, while seemingly necessary for survival, exposes a painful trade-off between the need for numbers and the ideal standard of military readiness and soldier well-being. The decision to conscript older citizens came only after the United States reportedly rejected President Zelensky's plea to lower the draft age to 16. This sequence of events revealed the difficult choice Ukraine's leadership faced and the extent of its reliance on foreign support, both military and diplomatic. Lowering the draft age to 16 would have been an even more controversial move, drawing international condemnation for potentially exploiting child soldiers and violating international norms regarding military recruitment. The U.S. refusal, likely driven by concerns over international law, human rights, and the potential for severe backlash, pushed Ukraine toward the less palatable but perhaps more internationally permissible option of expanding conscription to older age groups. The fact that Ukraine was compelled to turn to its elderly population after this rejection highlights a profound strategic dilemma: how to sustain a fighting force against a larger adversary when both traditional recruitment pools and international ethical considerations limit options. This situation reveals the profound dependency on external partners for guidance and constraint, even as Ukraine fights for its very existence. The ethical implications of sending individuals in their 50s and 60s who may have pre-existing health conditions or responsibilities into intense combat are considerable and reflect the extreme pressure on Kyiv. The Ukrainian government's decision to draft older men has elicited a strong reaction from Russia, which has vocally condemned the move. Russian officials and state media have seized upon this development, framing it as evidence of Ukraine's desperation and depicting it as an inhuman act by the Kyiv government. This narrative aligns with Russia's broader propaganda efforts to undermine the legitimacy of the Ukrainian government and portray the conflict as a proxy war where Ukraine is sacrificing its population at the behest of Western powers. Moscow's condemnation serves a dual purpose. It aims to demoralize Ukrainian forces and civilians by highlighting the perceived dire states of their military, and it seeks to influence international opinion by presenting Ukraine as a nation resorting to extreme and unethical measures. This rhetorical attack also served to contrast Ukraine's conscription effort with Russia's own approach to military recruitment. In stark contrast to Ukraine's increasingly broad conscription, Russia has consciously avoided implementing a general mobilization or expanding its draft age in a comparable manner. Instead, Moscow has focused on a strategy of voluntary recruitment, heavily incentivized by substantial financial bonus and various other benefits. This approach is designed to attract recruits from a younger demographic, typically those in their late teens to early 30s, without the political and social upheaval that a mass conscription of older citizens would entail. The Russian government has invested heavily in advertising campaigns, offering attractive enlistment bonus, increased salaries for active service, and other perks such as housing assistance, educational opportunities, and preferential treatment for families. These incentives are often significantly higher than average civilian wage in many parts of Russia, making military service an economically appealing option, especially in regions with limited employment opportunities. This strategy allows Russia to continuously replenish its force with a steady stream of volunteers, mitigating the need for a politically unpopular general draft that could provoke widespread public dissent and expose the true human cost of the conflict. The different recruitment strategies employed by Ukraine and Russia reveal a fundamental asymmetry in their respective approach to manpower management and resources allocation in the context of a prolonged war. Ukraine, facing a more acute demographic disadvantage and fighting on its own territory, is compelled to draw from increasingly older segments of its population, accepting the associated challenges of training, physical fitness, and public perception. This reflects a state fighting for survival, where every available individual resource is deemed necessary. The sight of older men in uniform undergoing basic training serves as a powerful, albeit grim, symbol of Ukraine's struggle. This visually reinforces the idea that the entire nation is engaged in a defensive war, demanding sacrifice from all segments of society, regardless of age. Such an image is also intended to rally domestic support and appeal for continued international assistance, highlighting the severe pressure faced by the country. Conversely, Russia's reliance on voluntary, incentivized recruitment reflects a more calculated approach designed to minimize domestic political opposition and maintain a facade of normalcy. By offering significant financial reward, Russia can tap into economic motivations, particularly among segments of the population seeking better economic prospects. This strategy allows the Kremlin to avoid the direct societal disruption and potential for widespread protests that a large-scale mandatory conscription of older citizens would likely generate. It also enables Russia to present a narrative of a professional volunteer army rather than one reliant on desperate measure. This approach is more sustainable politically for the Russian government in the long term, as it externalizes the cost of recruitment onto individuals who choose to join, rather than imposing mandatory service on a broader, potentially reluctant population. The difference in these strategies is not merely tactical. It speaks to distinct political and social contexts within which each nation is prosecuting the war, and the varying levels of public consent and engagement that their respective government can command. The contrast between Ukraine's expanding conscription to older age groups and Russia's incentivized volunteer recruitment also highlights the international community's varied response and ethical consideration. While the U.S. rejected lowering the draft age for minors, indicating some boundaries on what is deemed acceptable in warfare, the conscription of older adults, while challenging, generally falls within sovereign rights during a national emergency. However, the rapidity of training and the deployment of potentially unfit individuals to frontline remains areas of significant concerns for humanitarian organizations and international observers. The debate over fair and ethical conscription practice continues to evolve, especially in the context of modern conflicts where advanced weaponry and intense combat demand robust physical and mental resilience. The Ukrainian government's decision, therefore, is not just a military one, but also a profound societal one, signaling to its citizens and the world the depths of commitment required to resist an invading force. Ultimately, these divergent approaches to military recruitment underscore the protracted and grinding nature of the conflict. Ukraine's broadening of conscription signals a grim determination to endure, drawing upon all available human resources, regardless of age, to defend its sovereignty. This move implicitly acknowledged the substantial losses sustained and the ongoing need for fresh troops to hold the line against a larger adversary. In contrast, Russia's reliance on financial incentive and volunteerism indicates an effort to sustain its military operations without provoking significant domestic unrest, a strategy enabled by its larger population base and distinct political environment. Both strategies are a response to the immense demand of a high-intensity conflict, but they manifest in ways that reveal the fundamental difference in resources, political constraint, and national narrative of the two warring nations. The humanitarian cost of such policies, particularly for the older population now facing combat, remains a significant and somber consequences of the ongoing war. If you made it this far, congratulations, you have unlocked the truth. I would like to ask you a question. Ukraine is now conscripting men up to 60 years old. Is this a necessary and justified act of national survival in the face of an existential threat, or a sign of desperation that could backfire politically and militarily? What other options does Kyiv have? Join the discussion. Let us know your analysis in the comment. Like the video, and most importantly, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.